You know what the strangest part of almost dying is? It isn't the pain. It isn't the hospital. It isn't even the moment your heart stops. It's discovering that while you were fighting to stay alive, someone else had already started planning a life without you. My name is Samuel Carter. I'm 69 years old. And until last spring, I believed the hardest thing I'd ever survived was losing my wife after 43 years of marriage. I was wrong. The hardest thing wasn't burying the woman I loved. It was discovering that the only son we raised together had spent months preparing to bury me before I was even gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A story like this doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins nearly 50 years earlier on a stretch of rolling ranch land outside Sheridan, Wyoming, where my father handed me a rusted fence stretcher and said something I've never forgotten. Land doesn't belong to us, Sam. We only borrow it from the next generation. At 19 years old, I thought he was talking about cattle. It took me another 50 years to understand he was talking about character. Our ranch wasn't famous. It wasn't the biggest operation in Wyoming, but it had been in the Carter family since 1958. Almost 2,200 acres of grazing land, 2 cattle barns, 1 horse stable, 3 irrigation wells, and a little white farmhouse my father built with his own hands after returning from Korea. Every fence post on that property carried somebody's sweat. My grandfather's, my father's, mine. When I married Margaret in 1981, she became part of that story too. Margaret wasn't born on a ranch. She grew up in Cheyenne. The first time she tried helping me move cattle, she accidentally opened the wrong gate. We spent 6 hours chasing frightened calves across 3 neighboring properties. She laughed so hard she cried. I married her 2 months later. For 43 years, she turned that ranch into a home instead of just a business. She remembered every ranch hand's birthday, cooked enough food every branding season to feed half the county, and somehow knew exactly when I needed coffee without asking. When cancer took her 3 years ago, the silence inside that farmhouse became louder than anything I'd ever heard. People tell you time heals grief. That's not true. Time teaches you how to carry it without dropping everything else. Our only son, Ethan, was 38 by then. He lived in Denver with his wife, Claire. Worked in commercial real estate. Sharp dresser, confident speaker, always chasing bigger opportunities. When he was younger, I admired that ambition. After Margaret passed away, I started wondering if ambition had slowly become something else. Still, he was my son. You don't stop believing in your child because they make choices you don't understand. At least, I didn't. Every Sunday afternoon, he called. Sometimes for 10 minutes. Sometimes longer. Most conversations sounded exactly the same. How's the ranch, Dad? Still standing. You ever think about selling? I'd laugh every time. Over my dead body. Looking back, that answer probably stayed with him longer than I realized. Because sometime during the winter of 2025, he stopped asking whether I'd sell and started asking something entirely different. Dad, have you updated your will lately? The first time, it sounded practical. The second time, it sounded curious. By the fourth time, it sounded like somebody collecting information. I should have paid attention. Instead, I told myself he was simply worried about an aging father living alone. That's the dangerous thing about trust. It makes perfectly ordinary questions feel harmless, even when they aren't. Then, everything changed on a cold Thursday morning in March. I was repairing a broken section of fencing along the north pasture. Nothing unusual. Just another day. I'd almost finished stretching the last strand of wire when a crushing pressure settled across the center of my chest. At first, I thought it was exhaustion. Then, my left arm went numb. The fencing pliers slipped from my hand. The ground tilted sideways. And the last thing I remember seeing was one of my horses running toward the barn, as if it already knew something was terribly wrong. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw wasn't a hospital ceiling. It was an unfamiliar woman shining a flashlight into my eyes. Mr. Carter, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand. I tried. Nothing happened. Not because I didn't understand her, because my body refused to cooperate. Later, one of the doctors explained that I'd suffered a massive heart attack complicated by a lack of oxygen before the paramedics reached me. A rancher from the neighboring property had spotted my horse running loose without me and driven over to investigate. He found me lying beside the fence nearly 20 minutes after I collapsed. The cardiologist told me those 20 minutes nearly cost me my life. I spent 9 days in intensive care at Sheridan Memorial Hospital, another 3 weeks in the cardiac recovery unit. Those first days passed in fragments: machines, medication, nurses changing shifts, doctors repeating the same instructions over and over. No stress, no heavy lifting, no driving, no ranch work for several months. To a man who had spent 50 years working from sunrise until dark, those words sounded worse than the heart attack itself. Ethan arrived on the second day. He hugged me longer than usual, long enough that I almost believed everything was going to be all right. "Dad, you scared the hell out of me. I'm not going anywhere yet," I joked. He smiled, but something about that smile felt practiced. Claire visited too. She brought flowers, fruit I wasn't allowed to eat, and enough sympathy to convince every nurse she was the perfect daughter-in-law. Looking back, she hardly asked me how I felt. Most of her questions were about paperwork. Has someone been paying the ranch bills? Where do you keep the insurance documents? Does anyone besides you have access to the office safe? At the time, I thought they were trying to help. Now I know they were taking inventory. 3 days later, Ethan walked into my room carrying a leather folder. He spoke gently, exactly the way lawyers speak when they already know the answer they want. "Dad, there are a few insurance papers that need signatures. You really don't have to worry about them. I'll handle everything while you recover." I didn't even open the folder. I trusted my son for 38 years. Why would I start reading legal documents now? I signed where he pointed, for signatures. Maybe 5. I don't remember. Pain medication has a way of making every decision feel smaller than it really is. That mistake would almost cost me everything. Recovery didn't go the way anyone expected. 2 weeks after leaving intensive care, I developed an infection around one of the surgical sites. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough that my doctors transferred me to a specialized cardiac rehabilitation center nearly 80 miles away. They wanted constant monitoring, physical therapy. No visitors except immediate family. My phone battery died during the transfer. Its screen had already been cracked when I collapsed near the fence. I never got around to replacing it. The rehabilitation center issued temporary room phones instead. Old-fashioned things, the kind that barely worked. For almost 6 weeks, the outside world shrank to physical therapy sessions, medication schedules, and learning how to walk farther than 50 feet without feeling like someone was squeezing my chest. I assumed Ethan was handling the ranch. He told me everything was under control. "Don't worry about home. I've got it." Every father wants to believe those words, especially after nearly dying. One afternoon, a hospital administrator walked into my room holding a clipboard. "Mr. Carter, we've had several calls asking about your condition. Your son requested we stop giving medical updates to anyone outside immediate family." I nodded. That sounded reasonable. What I didn't know was that while I was slowly learning to walk again, almost nobody back in Sheridan believed I was coming home, and someone was making sure of that. Near the end of April, the doctors finally cleared me to leave. Not to work, not to ranch, just to go home. A volunteer from the rehabilitation center drove me back because the cardiologist refused to let me drive. As we turned onto the county road leading toward my property, something immediately felt wrong. The mailbox, gone. The old Carter Ranch sign, missing. Even the front gate looked different. Fresh paint, new chain, new lock. I frowned. Did I tell Ethan to replace that? The volunteer shrugged. I wouldn't know. Neither would I, because nobody had bothered asking me. When we stopped in front of the house, I saw 3 pickup trucks, a livestock trailer, and strangers carrying furniture out through my front door. One of them was loading my late wife's rocking chair into the back of a moving truck. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What? Before I could finish the sentence, a man I'd never seen before looked straight at me, confused, almost frightened, and quietly asked the question that changed everything. Who are you? For a second, I honestly thought he'd mistaken me for someone else. I'm Samuel Carter. I said it slowly, like repeating my own name would somehow make the situation make sense. The man looked over his shoulder toward the porch. Honey, I think you better come out here. A woman stepped outside carrying a cardboard box. Behind her, two teenagers stopped loading furniture and stared at me like I'd wandered onto the wrong property. The woman frowned. Sir, I'm sorry, but this is our ranch. No, not our ranch. My ranch. I'd stood on that porch for 43 Christmas mornings. I'd buried my wife beneath the cottonwood tree overlooking the south pasture. I'd planted every maple tree lining that driveway with my own hands. There wasn't a square foot of that property I didn't know. My pulse monitor had been removed 2 days earlier. At that moment, I wished it was still attached, because I could feel my heart pounding so hard it hurt. There has to be some mistake, I whispered. I've lived here since 1981. The woman's expression changed, not to anger, to concern. She walked a few steps closer. Sir, are you Samuel Carter? I am. She covered her mouth. Oh my God. She turned toward her husband. David, call Mr. Reynolds. Right now. 5 minutes later, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Michael Reynolds, the real estate broker. I'd known Mike for almost 20 years. He'd sold ranches all across Sheridan County. The second he saw me, every bit of color disappeared from his face. He stood completely still, like he'd just seen a ghost. Sam. His voice barely came out. I thought. So did everyone else. I answered. What exactly did everybody think? Mike looked at the young family, then back at me. His eyes were filled with something I'd never seen before. Fear. Real fear. Can we talk inside? No. I said. We'll talk right here. He swallowed hard. Sam, your son told us you passed away 6 weeks ago. The world went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Like somebody had reached inside my ears and turned everything off. What? He showed us the death certificate, the probate paperwork, the letters from the attorney. He said you wanted him to sell the ranch because there wasn't anyone left to keep it in the family. I laughed, a short, broken, disbelieving laugh. I'm standing right here. I know, Mike whispered. I know. The buyers, David and his wife Melissa, looked horrified. We had no idea. Melissa said immediately. We would never knowingly buy stolen property. She reached into her purse, pulled out a thick folder. This is everything we signed. Purchase agreement, closing documents, title paperwork, inspection reports. Every page carried one name over and over. Ethan Carter, acting on behalf of the estate of Samuel Carter. Estate. The word hit me harder than the heart attack. Somebody, my own son, had opened an estate while I was still breathing. I flipped another page, then another, until I reached a certified copy of a death certificate. Name, Samuel James Carter. Date of death, March 18th. Cause, cardiac arrest. Pronounced deceased. Sheridan County. Everything looked official. County seal. Doctor's signature. Registrar's stamp. Except, I wasn't dead. I had spent March 18th arguing with a physical therapist because she wanted me walking another 50 feet. I looked up at Mike. Who filed this? He didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. Finally, he rubbed both hands across his face. Ethan. He brought all the paperwork himself. He said everything had already gone through probate, and nobody questioned it. I stared at the forged death certificate for nearly a full minute. Then I noticed something else. A familiar signature. Attorney, Laura Benton. The same probate attorney who had helped Margaret and me prepare our wills almost 12 years earlier. Laura knew me. She'd had dinner at our house. She'd attended Margaret's funeral. There was no chance. Absolutely no chance. She believed I was dead without verifying it herself. Something about this paperwork didn't fit. Not yet, but I could already smell it. 40 years of ranching teaches you something. When one fence post falls, it usually isn't the only rotten one. I folded the papers carefully, handed them back to Melissa, then looked directly at Mike. I need Laura Benton's office address. Mike nodded slowly. I'll drive you there myself. As we walked toward his SUV, I turned back one last time. The rocking chair Margaret had spent every summer evening sitting in was still tied down inside the moving truck. For the first time since waking up in that hospital, I wasn't thinking about my heart anymore. I was thinking about one question. Why would my own son risk prison? Unless someone had convinced him he'd never be caught. The drive into Sheridan took just under 30 minutes. Neither Mike nor I spoke much. Every now and then, I'd catch him glancing at me, like he still wasn't completely convinced I was sitting in the passenger seat beside him. I couldn't blame him. If someone had handed me a certified death certificate with my closest friend's name on it, I probably would have believed it too. The problem wasn't that people believed the paperwork. The problem was someone had made sure the paperwork looked impossible to question. Laura Benton's office sat 2 blocks from the county courthouse, the same brick building she'd practiced law from for nearly 20 years. When we walked through the front door, her receptionist looked up from her desk. The smile on her face disappeared instantly. Her eyes widened. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. "Mr. Carter?" I nodded. "I need to see Laura. Right now." She didn't ask for an appointment. She didn't ask me to wait. She simply stood up and hurried toward the back offices. Less than 30 seconds later, Laura Benton came around the corner. She stopped so suddenly that the file she was carrying slipped from her hands and scattered across the hallway floor. For several long seconds, neither of us said a word. Finally, she looked me straight in the eyes, then quietly asked, "Who signed your death certificate?" We closed her office door. Mike stayed outside. Laura locked the door before sitting across from me. "I need you to tell me everything." So I did. The heart attack, the hospital, the rehabilitation center, coming home, the strangers in my house, the forged paperwork. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached into a cabinet behind her desk, pulled out a thick probate file. Across the front, written in black marker, "The estate of Samuel J. Carter." She slid it toward me. "I never opened this estate." I frowned. "But your signature." She shook her head. "That's not my signature." I looked closer. At first glance, it looked identical. Same handwriting, same initials, same notary stamp. Then Laura pointed to one tiny detail. I never underlined my last name. I looked again. She was right. The signature was close. Very close. But not hers. Someone had copied it. Almost perfectly. Almost. Laura opened the file. Inside were copies of documents I'd supposedly signed before my death. A revised will, property transfer forms, a durable power of attorney, medical authorization papers, even a handwritten letter, supposedly written by me. Every page carried my signature, except I'd never seen any of them before. My stomach tightened. Then something clicked. Hospital, leather folder, insurance papers, 4, maybe 5 signatures. My heart sank. "Ethan." Laura watched my expression carefully. "What?" "He asked me to sign paperwork in the hospital." "What kind of paperwork?" I thought it was insurance. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly closed the file. "Samuel." If he mixed genuine signatures with forged documents, this investigation just became much more complicated. Laura picked up her office phone. She didn't call the sheriff. She didn't call the court. She called the county recorder's office. "Margaret, I need you to check something." She read off several document numbers, then waited. Almost 2 minutes passed. Finally, the woman on the other end answered. Laura's face changed. "What do you mean it was filed electronically?" Another pause. "No, don't tell anyone we're asking. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up. Looked directly at me. Those documents weren't filed in person. They were uploaded through a licensed legal filing account. I frowned. "Whose account?" She took a slow breath. I don't know yet, but only attorneys, title companies, and a handful of authorized filing agencies can submit probate records that way. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just Ethan making a terrible decision. Someone who understood the legal system had helped him. Maybe knowingly, maybe not. Either way, this had grown far beyond a family argument. Before we left, Laura opened another folder. This arrived yesterday. She slid a property tax statement across the desk. Owner, Silver Creek Land Holdings, LLC. I stared at the name. Who are they? Laura answered quietly. They're the company that bought your ranch. I looked confused. What about the family living there? They didn't buy it directly. They bought it from Silver Creek 2 days ago. So your son didn't sell the ranch to them. He sold it to an LLC first. Laura nodded. And LLCs like this are often created to hide who actually profits from a transaction. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This hadn't been a desperate son trying to get quick money. This had been planned, carefully, professionally, months before I ever collapsed beside that fence. And for the first time, one question frightened me more than all the others. Who was smart enough to build a scheme this sophisticated? And why was my son willing to become the face of it? Laura and I drove straight to the county recorder's office. She never once suggested calling Ethan. Neither did I. If there was one thing 40 years of ranching had taught me, it was this. You don't walk into a pasture yelling when you know a rattlesnake is hiding somewhere in the grass. You find it first. Then you decide what to do. The recorder's office occupied the second floor of the courthouse. Small building, old wooden floors, records stretching back more than a century. Margaret Ellis, the county recorder, met us outside the archives room. She shook my hand so tightly it almost hurt. I've never been happier to see someone alive. She tried to smile. It didn't last. Laura closed the office door. We need to know exactly who filed Samuel Carter's probate documents. Margaret logged into her computer. A few seconds later, the filing history appeared. She leaned closer to the screen, then frowned. That's strange. Laura stepped beside her. What is it? The filing account belongs to Benton and Associates, Laura's law firm. Laura stared at the monitor. That's impossible. I didn't submit anything. Margaret clicked deeper into the system. Every electronic filing leaves a digital fingerprint. Time, date, device identification, IP address, user credentials. She opened the audit log. Then her eyebrows lifted. The filings weren't submitted from your office. Laura folded her arms. Where then? Margaret rotated the screen toward us. A public Wi-Fi network. I looked down. Location: Sheridan Regional Medical Center. My stomach dropped. The hospital. Laura didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, she asked quietly, "What day?" Margaret checked. March 19th, the day after my heart attack. The same afternoon Ethan had walked into my hospital room carrying that leather folder. The same afternoon he'd asked me to sign insurance paperwork. I closed my eyes. Every memory came rushing back. The medication, the morphine, the exhaustion. I hadn't read a single page. I trusted my son. Laura broke the silence. He used the hospital's public internet, while his father was lying 3 floors above him. Margaret nodded slowly. And whoever logged into your firm's filing account already had your username and password. Laura looked genuinely shaken. I've never shared those credentials. Not with anyone. That meant only one thing. Someone hadn't borrowed them. Someone had stolen them. We've only got a face. He never signs paperwork. He never appears on ownership records. He lets other people take all the risk. Laura looked at the photo. So Ethan never even knew who he was working for. David didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "I hope that's true." Late that evening, I drove home alone. For the first time since returning, I didn't stop outside the ranch. I couldn't. Instead, I parked beside my old fishing pond nearly 2 miles away, sat on the tailgate, watched the sun disappear. Everything I'd built, everything Mary and I had spent 40 years creating, had become nothing more than a line on someone else's investment spreadsheet. That hurt. But something else hurt more, because every new piece of evidence kept leading back to Ethan. No one had forced him to forge signatures. No one had forced him to declare his father dead. No one had forced him to walk away with millions he hadn't earned. Somewhere along the way, my son had made his own choices, and I still couldn't understand why. The next morning, David Mercer called before sunrise. His voice was sharper than before. "We've got movement." "What happened?" "Jessica Hale. They found her car." "Where?" "Abandoned. Outside Billings." My heart sank. "Was she inside?" "No. The car was empty." "But," he paused. There was blood. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then David said something that changed everything. "We also recovered her phone. It contains one voicemail. She left it 6 hours before disappearing." "What did she say?" David's voice lowered. "She said, 'If anything happens to me, don't trust Ethan Carter. He knows who they're really working for.'" I felt the blood drain from my face. Until that moment, I'd been trying to convince myself my son had been manipulated, used, tricked. Jessica's final message destroyed that hope. Because if she was telling the truth, then Ethan wasn't just another victim. He knew exactly who was behind Silver Creek, and he had chosen to stand beside them anyway. Jessica Hale's voicemail replayed 3 times before anyone in the room spoke. The recording lasted just 23 seconds, but every word carried weight. "If anything happens to me, don't trust Ethan Carter. He knows who they're really working for. Check the storage unit. Locker 214. Everything's there." Then silence. No screams. No struggle. Just the sound of a car door closing. The message ended. David Mercer looked at me. "Locker 214. Laura immediately grabbed a notepad. "Did she say where?" David nodded. "Billings. Northside Secure Storage. We've already got agents on the way." 3 hours later, the 4 of us stood inside a climate-controlled storage facility on the edge of Billings. Locker 214 wasn't large, maybe 10 feet by 15. The manager unlocked it, stepped aside. David opened the metal door. Nobody moved. Inside, there wasn't furniture or boxes of personal belongings. There were filing cabinets, 7 of them, every drawer labeled, every folder organized. Laura whispered, "My God." Jessica hadn't been running. She'd been collecting evidence for months. The first cabinet contained property files, nearly 60 separate land purchases, different states, different owners. Same pattern. Every victim had suffered a recent tragedy: heart attacks, strokes, Alzheimer's, widowhood, hospital stays. Every single one had signed paperwork while vulnerable. Every transaction eventually passed through Silver Creek Land Holdings. David looked up. "This isn't fraud. This is an industry." Rebecca, a forensic accountant David had brought with him, opened another drawer. Wire transfers, bank statements, corporate ledgers. Money moving through dozens of shell companies before disappearing offshore. The total climbed rapidly. 5 million, 8 million, 12 million. By late afternoon, Rebecca stopped adding. She looked exhausted. Conservative estimate, she swallowed. $43 million. Nobody spoke. 43 million. Taken from families who never even realized they'd been robbed. Then Laura found something different. A black leather notebook. No company logo. No labels. Just dates. She opened the first page. Every meeting. Every payment. Every participant. Written by hand. Jessica's handwriting. Halfway through, she suddenly froze. David noticed immediately. "What is it?" She slowly turned the notebook around. One page contained only 4 names, each followed by a checkmark. Scott Benson, Jessica Hale, Ethan Carter. One final name, without a checkmark. Samuel Carter. I stared at it. "What does that mean?" David answered quietly. "I think you were supposed to die." The room went silent. Laura looked sick. David continued. "If Samuel Carter survives, the land transfer becomes much harder. If Samuel Carter dies, everything becomes routine probate. I felt my hands begin to shake, not from fear, from realization. The heart attack had been real, but everything after it had depended on making sure I never came back. Rebecca called everyone over. You need to see this. She'd found another folder. Employee payment schedules, monthly bonuses, commission percentages. Each participant earned a percentage of every successful property acquisition. Jessica, $120,000. An attorney in Nebraska, $340,000. 2 accountants, over $500,000 combined. Then Ethan. I stared at the number. $1,870,000. Almost $2 million. Laura looked at me. He didn't sell the ranch because he needed money. David slowly nodded. He sold his father because it paid better. Just as David began photographing the files, his phone rang. He answered, listened. Then his entire expression changed. What? He stood perfectly still. When? Another pause. I understand. He hung up. Nobody spoke. Finally, he looked directly at me. We've got a problem. What happened? Ethan Carter never flew to Mexico yesterday like we thought. I frowned. Then where is he? David's answer landed like a hammer. He's in Sheridan. He checked into a hotel less than 2 miles from your house. Laura stared at him. Why would he come back now? David looked toward the notebook still lying open on the table. I don't think he came back for the ranch. I think he came back for whoever still has Jessica's evidence. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something terrifying. If Ethan believed I had that evidence, he wasn't coming home to explain himself. He was coming home to make sure I never had the chance to tell anyone what I'd found. I didn't argue with David. I didn't ask for another explanation. I simply grabbed my truck keys. If Ethan is back in Sheridan, I'm going. David stood up immediately. No. I looked at him. This isn't a father-son conversation anymore. This is an active federal investigation. Laura stepped between us. Samuel. If Ethan knows Jessica disappeared, and if he thinks the evidence survived, he could panic. David nodded. And desperate people make permanent mistakes. I hated every word they were saying, mostly because they were right. An hour later, an unmarked SUV sat across the street from the Red Pine Lodge on the north side of town. Room 214, registered under the name Eric Collins, paid in cash. But the security footage didn't lie. It was Ethan, older than I'd seen him, thinner, a beard he hadn't worn before. But it was my son. There wasn't any doubt. David lowered the binoculars. He's alone. Laura asked quietly, do we move now? David shook his head. No, we wait. For what? He isn't here for a hotel. He's waiting for someone. We didn't have to wait long. Just after 6 p.m., a black Cadillac Escalade pulled into the parking lot. No front license plate. Dark tinted windows. One man climbed out. Gray suit. Silver hair. Perfect posture. I recognized him immediately. The same man from the airport surveillance photograph. David whispered, that's him. The man we'd spent 3 days trying to identify. He walked into the hotel without looking around, straight toward Ethan's room. David waited exactly 30 seconds, then nodded to the agents surrounding the building. Nobody moves until I say. Inside room 214. The hidden microphone picked up every word. The silver-haired man spoke first. You've become difficult to reach. Ethan sounded nervous. I didn't know who else had access to Jessica's files. You told me she destroyed everything. I believed she had. Silence. Then the older man sighed. Belief is expensive. Mistakes are more expensive. Ethan asked quietly, what happens now? The answer chilled everyone listening. Now. We solved the Samuel Carter problem. David didn't wait another second. He grabbed his radio. Move. The hallway filled with agents. Heavy footsteps. Room 214. One loud knock. Federal agents. Open the door. Inside. Everything exploded into motion. The microphone captured furniture crashing. Someone yelling. Glass breaking. Then, a gunshot. Laura gasped. I was already running. David tried to stop me. He couldn't. By the time I reached the second floor, the hallway was chaos. Agents flooded through the doorway. Someone shouted, "Weapon." Another voice, "Suspect running." The silver-haired man had smashed through the bathroom window. He dropped onto the roof below, then disappeared behind the hotel. David immediately sent agents after him. Inside the room, Ethan sat on the floor, hands shaking, blood running from a cut above his forehead where flying glass had hit him. He looked up, saw me standing in the doorway. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, he whispered, "Dad." I hadn't heard him call me that in weeks, maybe months. I looked at him, really looked at him. This wasn't the confident man who'd forged documents. This wasn't the son who'd stolen my ranch. This was a terrified man who suddenly realized the people he'd trusted never intended to protect him. I asked only one question. Who is he? Ethan closed his eyes. I don't know his real name. He always used another one. David stepped beside me. What name? Ethan answered almost too quietly to hear. Victor Kane. David's face changed instantly. You've got to be kidding. I turned toward him. You know him? David nodded slowly. If that's really Victor Kane. We've been chasing him for almost 15 years. Before anyone could ask another question, a radio crackled. Agent Mercer. David grabbed it. Go. We lost him. What? The suspect stole a pickup behind the hotel, headed east. David slammed his fist against the wall. Damn it. Victor Kane, the man behind millions of dollars in stolen land, had slipped away again. But this time, he'd left something behind. My son. And judging by the look on Ethan's face, he was finally ready to tell us everything. Ethan didn't ask for a lawyer. That surprised everyone, especially David. Most people in his position say exactly 3 things. I want an attorney. I didn't know. I didn't do anything. Ethan said none of them. Instead, he looked at me, not Agent Mercer, not Laura, me, his father, then quietly said, I never thought he'd actually try to kill you. The room fell silent. David switched on the recorder. Everything from this point forward is being recorded. Ethan nodded. I understand. For the next 4 hours, he told us everything. Victor Kane wasn't his real name. It was simply the name everyone in the organization used. No last names, no personal histories, just first meetings arranged through lawyers, accountants, and financial consultants. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted answers. Because everyone got paid. Ethan admitted he'd first met one of Victor's recruiters almost 2 years earlier during a commercial real estate conference in Billings. They already knew everything about our ranch, the medical history, the ownership records, even my heart condition. At first, they only wanted inside information, nothing illegal, or, at least, nothing that sounded illegal. Then the offers became larger. $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, eventually, almost $2 million. All he had to do was make sure the paperwork moved quickly after I died. He lowered his head. I convinced myself I wasn't killing anyone. I told myself I was only handling documents. But then, he looked directly at me. You survived. David leaned forward. So why continue? Ethan's answer barely rose above a whisper. Because Victor said if I backed out, everyone would know I forged the first documents. He said I'd spend the rest of my life in prison. So I kept going. Every bad decision after that only buried him deeper. 3 days later, federal warrants were executed across 4 states. Law firms, accounting offices, title companies, storage facilities, bank records. Everything Jessica Hale had hidden inside locker 214 connected perfectly. The investigation exploded. Within 48 hours, 12 people had been arrested. 5 more agreed to cooperate. Millions of dollars in frozen assets were recovered. Silver Creek Land Holdings officially ceased operations. Victor Kane remained missing for 6 days. Then, a rancher outside Cody, Wyoming, noticed an abandoned pickup hidden inside an old equipment barn. He called the sheriff. Deputies found Victor asleep inside. Cash, 3 passports, a satellite phone, and enough fake identification to disappear 3 different times. He surrendered without firing a shot.